Welcome, everyone. I call the June 21, 2023 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are a public hearing on the Downtown Transition Affordable Housing Overlay Amendments and a study session on the Comprehensive Plan Racial Equity Analysis and Toolkit, Engagement Work, and Draft Climate Element. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. The City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments not on tonight's agenda. If you are here specifically to comment on the Downtown Affordable Housing Overlay Amendments, I would ask you make those comments during the public hearing when there is a specific time for public comment on that. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and we will be using our little lights up there to let you know as we count down those 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Please remember this during your comments. Public comment and hearing testimony will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today. People wishing to submit written comments were also requested to submit those by 3 p.m. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. And in fact, we did receive a number of comments this afternoon that I had the opportunity to review, and I expect the other commissioners did as well. Those in attendance may also make comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets that are at the table at the front of the room there. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. The video of this meeting was provided on the meeting agenda, or a call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone and listen live to the meeting. A video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone may follow along. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of commissioners. Commissioner Jones is absent and excused. Commissioner Westerbeck?
Here.
Commissioner Curd?
Here.
Commissioner Robson?
Here.
Commissioner Anders is also absent and excused. And Commissioner Gustafson?
Here.
In addition, Deputy Community Development Director Ashley Winchell and Senior Planners Dave Boyd and Kirsten Mant are attending. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound as there is a delay. Before we begin, I'd like to remind commenters that while you may speak to whatever topic you choose, we ask that if you are a council candidate, you do not use this time to speak to your own campaign. Each person is solely responsible for their own comments, but speaking about your own campaign could be a violation of campaign laws, which the Public Disclosure Commission would determine. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by raising your hand, and I'll call on you as I see you. All the commissioners participating are present tonight, so I'll just look down the table. This will avoid the problem of having two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. And please mute your microphone when not speaking. Moving on. Are we echoing? Moving on, the first item on the agenda is for public comment. The city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. This time is for items not on tonight's agenda. Deputy Director Winchell, please let us know if there are any comments received.
I have people signed up, but if you want to speak at the public hearing and I say your name, feel free to just wave me off. So the first name I have is Katie Inquist. Were you wanting to speak at general public comment or during the public hearing? Okay. The next I have is Elizabeth Myers. Did you want to speak during the public hearing on sorry, my brain's not working. Or did you want to speak at the general public? Okay. Rachel O'Gurkov, did you want to speak at the public hearing? Okay. Melinda Davies, public hearing. Mark Swanson?
I have both.
Okay.
Agenda items and public hearing.
Let's do the off-agenda items now, and then we'll call you for public hearing.
I'm not going to form a narrative. I'm just going to go down a list of topics. You've heard me talk about these things before. The Brookings Institute evaluated the 2020 census and realized that the U.S. population growth rate is 0.12%. You plug that into a calculator, 2044 at 0.12%, we should have slightly over 51,000 population total. Now, if you want to go at the high end, the Central Intelligence Agency has a higher number. They say we're growing at 0.68%. When we go to 2044, that puts about 7,500 on top of our 48,000, 55,000. 55,000 population, we're going to hit that next summer after these apartments open up. There are certain things you don't do. You don't change your oil over your garden plot. You don't wash your dishes in the bathtub. Similarly, you don't impact population density against the most ecological sensitive piece of land between Lake Sammamish and Lake Washington. And of course, I'm talking about the tire dust. As long as we're on that, they had a webinar today. I hope you guys listened to the Department of Ecology's webinar. Very instructive. Got good links. I've already said, and I provided you the link, Metro buses put out 200 times the tire dust than a car. 200 times. You know how buses work. They start empty, they fill up, they end empty. And then they go back against the traffic where they're mostly empty. The bottom line is that Metro buses only at 25% full capacity. That's never going to work when you're increasing traffic and reducing parking spots for these apartments. This is insane. It's like the Seattle City outlawing fossil fuels for new restaurants, no natural gas heat, when the electricity is produced by heat engines that turn generators. The heat engines operate at 40% Carnot efficiency, and then once you create the electricity, there's a 25% drop-off. Again, to just deal with EV vehicles, we're gonna have to put twice the amount of copper over our heads. Amperage times resistance. Amperage squared times resistance equal line power losses. You guys have got to start paying more attention to the science and reducing urban sprawl.
Thank you. Your 3 minutes are up.
I know, thank you. Reducing urban sprawl doesn't cover your bases.
The next person signed up to speak is Cameron Hilton. Did you want to speak during general? Okay. And then I have Gary Smith. Okay. If there's anyone who wishes to speak during this time who didn't sign up, either raise your hand in Zoom or come to the podium. For the record, there are no raised hands in Zoom.
All right, thank you. With that, we will move on to the public hearing. We'll open the public hearing and we'll start with a presentation from Senior Planner Boyd.
Thank you. I will share my screen. So tonight is the initial public hearing on the Downtown Transition Affordable Housing Voluntary Incentive Amendments. We've had several study sessions on this so far, but this is the initial public hearing. These are on amendments that were applied for by Dave and Connie Drews. And tonight, our purpose, I'm going to provide some additional analysis done since the last study session on April 5th. We're presenting for the first time draft code amendments and looking for commission feedback on those plan and code amendment proposals. And again, any input they have on findings, which we haven't drafted yet, we'll bring them back at a continued public hearing. I'm going to go back over some ground that we've covered in previous study sessions, just for the record here in the public hearing. So the Drew's application was received along with another application from Brett Carlson at the south end of the downtown transition affordable housing overlay. And we initially moved forward considering both of those together. And together they did a public notice. We did a courtesy mailing to property owners within 500 feet of the overlay. Notice boards have been placed on each property, and flyers have been placed in the notice boards as the discussion has proceeded. And this public hearing was noticed on our website and in the Seattle Times. A little bit of background. The original proposal for the downtown transition, general downtown corridor, and SR 522 corridor districts, which all could be considered transitional districts within the downtown sub-area. Those were studied in the environmental impact statement originally, and the original proposal was for a height of 4 floors and 54 feet, then step down to the 35-foot heights in the surrounding residential zones. During the council deliberations on the downtown plan, they scaled the downtown transition district back to 3 floors and 35 feet, and also imposed a density limit. Since then, in 2018, the density limit was removed for the orange areas on the map and kept for the orange with white crosshatch on the map there. And it was removed from the area with later was removed from the area with orange with black crosshatch, and affordable housing requirements were added there. So that's all prior to these actions. The Drews application asked to rezone 5 properties that they had acquired at the northwest corner of 96th Avenue Northeast and Thorsk Street. They asked to add a provision to allow additional height through voluntary incentives. The primary incentive would be a requirement that at least half of the units in this project be affordable at a rate of, well, actually they didn't recommend an affordability level in their application. And then they also asked for conditions relating to the special setbacks and height limits in the downtown development regulations. The Drew's rezone in this map here would basically eliminate a few of the zoning boundaries, including the boundary between the downtown sub-area and the West Hill sub-area. So where you see the yellow X, that boundary would be removed, and and the downtown transition affordable housing overlay would continue from the south to the Drews parcels. Where you see the blue X, that would also be removed as a boundary of the downtown sub-area. And but it would still be a boundary between the regular downtown transition district and the affordable housing overlay. The blue lines on the map outline the Drews parcels. And so those would be the map changes that would be comprehensive plan amendments that are included in your packet. And then I'm just going to quickly, as a kind of refresher, go over the Drews' application. These are the conceptual plans that they submitted with their application, and then I'm also going to show some revised plans or that have further developed plans that they've submitted along the way. So the proposal was to build a structure up to 5 stories on the eastern portion of the land due to the topography. This is a parcel that the only reasonable, feasible access to this parcel is from 96th and Thorsk. So that was part of the city's analysis that one reason why we thought that the rezone was reasonable. It would get access from an area that is zoned downtown transition on both sides. This is a schematic plan of the ground level with the original plan has a, well, no, this is a revised plan that has a entrance to 1 level of parking, essentially at the grade of Thorsk and 96th, and then a ramp along the south side of the building to a 2nd level of parking. The front part of the building, the east part, would be a 2-level lobby with other uses looking down on the lobby below. And then above that would be 4 floors of essentially micro apartment housing, small apartments with small efficiency kitchens and a bathroom, and then a common kitchen on each floor that would be used by the tenants in the individual units, or could be used. And this is the first floor above parking would also have a courtyard space available on the south side. And then the levels above would look down on that courtyard. These are just some schematic sections of the building, and the section in the middle demonstrates the one issue that they encountered as they were working on these schematic plans and looking at our retaining wall regulations that would essentially prevent them from doing even a minimal sized building footprint and still provide adequate fire access given those retaining wall regulations. These are sections going longitudinally east-west sections showing the 2 parking levels below the 4 housing levels. And then a series of massing diagrams from different points of view. Again, the parking levels in the dark orange, the housing level in the yellowish tan. So looking from the southeast and northeast, and here from the looking from the southwest. And so in the distance there are the Fieldhouse apartments and the POP development. And in the foreground are the surrounding single-family homes. The Drews also did a parking study to test whether our parking regulations, and we do have parking regulations that allow for reduction in parking levels for senior and special needs housing. The Drews are proposing that this significant portion of this building be for individuals with developmental disabilities, and so they would qualify for those parking reductions, at least for those units, and did a study based on that and the proximity to frequent transit, the future bus rapid transit line stops near the library, which determined that the current code, which allows a reduction down to 0.3 spaces per unit, recognizing that for those populations, most of the tenants won't have cars of their own, but there still is a need for staff and guest parking, what they're proposing in their schematics would work, and it is just above the 0.3 spaces per unit requirement. And that's a requirement that they can get to with a parking study. So this was a kind of a truth testing. The Drews also submitted comments with these photographs on the right and left. On the left are some existing developments in Bothell with retaining walls, with buildings set within a recessed area facing fairly tall retaining walls. And on the right are some images of a development in Lake City that they are to some degree modeling their proposal after. And in the middle, they had also noted that a project under construction right now, the Ross Road Apartments, was also being built with a retaining wall that steps down and provides more space between the wall and the building, and offered that as an example of something that they thought would be reasonable and appropriate for their site. So looking at the retaining structure regulations, the regulations are in the diagram on the left here, and the diagram on the right is actually a section for those Ross Road Apartments and the retaining wall they're building right now. The regulations were really intended to protect adjacent properties, and so all of the illustrations of the retaining walls in our current regulations are illustrating outward-facing retaining walls, whereas the Ross Road example and the other examples that the Drews have provided are where we have retaining walls that face inward toward the development. So we felt that it was worth considering separate, different regulations for those different types of walls, and basing them to some degree on what has been allowed and is being built at the Ross Road Apartments. So there, they built an engineered retaining wall just off of the property line, and then they have the same special setback and special landscaping requirements that the Drews property would have adjacent to the residential only zoning, that requires a 25-foot setback and a 10-foot landscape buffer. And they're providing the 10-foot landscape buffer in a planter that sits against the retaining wall and mitigates the height of the retaining wall. So the code amendments that you have in your packet tonight basically build on that, and also feedback that we've gotten from our development review staff, both in planning and in public works. So the first figure in the proposed amendments deals with a non-engineered retaining structure, such as a rockery. So that's not a vertical wall; it's set back at an angle. And in those situations, the base of the retaining wall needs to be as far away from the property line as the overall height between the base of the wall and the property line. So it basically allows for a one-to-one slope behind behind the retaining wall. The second figure shows an engineered retaining wall similar to the one that we just looked at the Ross Road townhomes, whereby an engineered retaining wall can be built within a foot of the property line. This one shows that the 10-foot required landscape buffer can be provided in up to 2 planters up against that wall, and that a minimum 10-foot access space needs to be allowed for fire access and other access to the building. It also establishes the same maximum height limit as outward-facing walls, but allows exceptions to that height limit with mitigation that's already outlined in the code. So that's the basis for the change, proposed change in retaining walls. Then when it comes to the special setback requirements, currently all of the transition zones require a 25-foot special setback from adjacent residential-only zones with a 10-foot landscape buffer, as shown in these diagrams. And then they also require an upper level setback that above 3 stories, building needs to be set back another 65 feet, as shown, whether it's directly adjacent or across the street from residential-only zoning. These are some of the code amendments that the Drews asked for, code regulations that they asked for amendments for their particular project. So what we're proposing in the code amendments that you've received tonight is to allow an exception to those special setback and height limits only for projects that are getting a voluntary incentive for that additional height and providing that 50%, at least 50% of the units as affordable units. And we're proposing that those be affordable at an average of 50% of the area median income. Get into that a little bit more later. But basically, the idea is that we take the elevation at grade of the nearest adjacent residence and then take the average grade plane of the proposed project and allow that difference in additional height up to 19 feet, which takes them from 35 feet, the current 35 feet, to the EIS studied 54 feet. It was pointed out that including the adjacent minimum setback in this diagram was not necessary and potentially confusing, so we're proposing to remove that. And also I put in a note here in red for the special setback that there is a proposed reduction to 20 feet there. So initially we were considering basing the height differential on the adjacent minimum setback, but that would require an applicant to basically develop a hypothetical plan for the adjacent parcel if it wasn't already developed, or even if it was partially developed. It just seemed much more straightforward to go with the grade at the closest residence on the adjacent parcel. So affordable housing provisions, I already touched on this. There's already in this affordable housing overlay what is known as a mandatory program that when we removed the density limit, we put in place a requirement that for developments of 5 units or more, but Planning Commission has already indicated a desire to change that to 10 units or more in their middle housing deliberations. So we're including that here. That applies to 10% of the units need to be affordable. And for the mandatory program, the affordability level is 80%. It needs to be affordable to households earning 80% of the area median income for ownership housing and 60% of the area median income for rental housing. The voluntary incentive in this case would allow up to 5 floors and 54 feet of height that meet certain affordability requirements. So in this case, at least half of the units would have to be affordable. And we are proposing that the affordability level be an average of 50% of area median income. The other voluntary incentive program that we have in the city applies to the SR 522 corridor, the portion of that district that along the east side of 522 as it turns north from Wayne Curve up to the downtown core. And that is the first of our affordable housing initiatives that's actually under construction with the Sama Apartments on the old Bothell Ski and Bike site. That project, that incentive is it's based on 100% affordability. That's what they were proposing to do as an affordable housing development, but it also has the average affordability for households earning 50% of area median income. And the reason we made it an average is in that case they had grant sources that were requiring in some cases 30%, in some cases 50%, in some cases 60%, and but a 50% average was fit with that mix of units that they were looking to have. And so we think that's also an appropriate criteria here that gives a developer some flexibility in terms of having a range of affordability levels. Parking reductions. Initially, the DRU's application included some additional parking reductions, but as we applied the parking reductions that have already been adopted into the code through a state mandate in 2019, that allows a parking reduction to 0.3 spaces per unit for senior and special needs housing, as justified by a parking study. And the DRU's parking study does indicate that they will need about that amount, and they can provide that amount of parking. So we're not proposing any other parking reductions or parking amendments at this time. So with that, I'll open it up for any clarifying questions from commission, and then I'd like to give the applicant an opportunity to make a statement before we move into public testimony.
Commissioners? Commissioner Robson.
Thank you, Senior Planner. I was wondering if you got a chance to look at how affordability options for new developments, whether or not they create a niche market for people who have lower income and essentially withdrawing, making the market smaller for within the general market. So essentially there will be a lot of people competing for general, like for the reduced affordability, and who wouldn't otherwise be looking in this area, while reducing the general market, and therefore maybe not reducing the cost of apartments overall. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand. So we've received comments and testimony that there is demand for this type of housing, the special needs housing in this area. So I think there will probably certainly be adequate demand for this housing. One of the comments we've received was from the Alyssa Burnett Center that provides services for this population, and we think the proximity to that, and they indicated that that this would be a great location for this kind of housing. The DRUs are proposing a mix of affordable and market rate housing, and a mix of special needs and general population housing in their project. So it will add also to the supply of general needs housing, albeit in a particular form of microhousing that we also think there is a demand for in this market. So It's true that it won't provide as much of that as it would otherwise, but if it was not a special needs project, then they wouldn't be getting the incentives to do the extra 2 floors. So I think it's probably about a wash there.
Just for clarity, I in no way was questioning the demand for these kinds of apartments. I know that our special needs residents are desperate for places with this kind of access and availability. I'm very supportive of building that kind of housing in our community. I was just looking at the bigger picture about how, in general, affordability rates. So just to clarify, when we are talking about these kinds of modifications to the code, we're not talking about including this as downtown, within the downtown area, and then applying this to every new construction within the downtown area. We're kind of talking about this site with this topography and this, affordability. Essentially, it would have to be sort of co-sponsored living spaces, and not just all the way downtown. Any developer can do this in any lot. I think that's kind of what I'm trying. I think I kind of need that clarified.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. No, these wouldn't apply throughout the downtown sub area as they're drafted. They would apply only to the downtown transition affordable housing overlay, that orange area with black cross-hatching on the map. That this map on the screen right now that shows a portion of that, we think that the likelihood that other developers will take advantage of this, that will be willing to reserve 50% of their units as affordable housing, will make it a rare occurrence. I would be surprised to see that there may be a couple of other sites. There's a King County Housing Authority site next to it that the Housing Authority has been approached and asked if they would be interested in this, and they say they have no plans to redevelop that site in the near future. But down the road, that it might be something that would be appropriate there. And then there are other portions of this, of the overlay, where the topography wouldn't really provide as much of a opportunity to increase the heights without impacting the surrounding residential. So it will be limited in that regard. The reason we didn't, and this is in response to some of the comments we received, the reason we haven't limited it to just this site is because then we're getting into an area where we could be accused of spot zoning, and we thought that this was the way that we've crafted this to only apply in the overlay area, and also to provide most of the special conditions as conditions of the voluntary incentive, really will reduce the potential impact on surrounding areas.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks, Commissioner Westerbeck. Dave, I know we've talked a bit as this is developed about, have staff started to develop what sort of topography changes would be required, or are we going to sort of codify that or measure that, or, detail that somehow? Because I know there's been a lot of talk about you can do the 5 stories if this went through, only if you're below and I know you touched on that a little bit just now, but it seems like there would need to be some parameters on that.
And that's what we've attempted to do in the code amendments by conditioning the additional height on the difference in level between the average grade plane of the proposed development and the nearest point of the
that diagram.
Development. Yeah.
Okay, just want to be clear about that. Okay, thank you.
Other commissioner comments? We have discussed this a number of times, so I think many of our questions have been discussed. So with that, I think we'd move on to the applicant statement.
Do you want me to talk? Okay. Commissioners, thank you. Dave and Connie Drews here. We just wanted to just give a quick brief overview of the project. And the first place that we wanted to start is how did we get here in the first place? And so we have a wonderful 24-year-old daughter who does have special needs. And when we were looking around at options, there are very, very, very limited options. In fact, a recent study showed that in the last decade, so this is for a population of 37,000 individuals with IDD in Washington state. In the last decade, only 28 units per year were built in Washington state. So the need is staggering, and the number of new units coming online is very, very limited. So that's how we got here. We actually unintentionally got here also because we started by trying to buy one lot in order to develop on that lot. It ended up that the neighbor wanted to sell, and so we ended up buying the neighbor's property. So we're not professional developers. These 100 units will change and impact a lot of people directly and also indirectly. So there are a lot of people that are touched or related in some way to a family that has somebody with IDD in it. And so one of the questions that has come up is why are you requesting code amendments? So again, we're not professional developers, and we have a lot of friends in the special needs community, and we know a lot of families that are impacted by this, and they're trying to solve the problem in the same way that we're trying to solve it. And what we're trying to do is, with these code amendments, is to make it possible to have this project move forward. So in order for it to move forward, essentially the simplified way that I think about it is there has to be enough money coming in to cover the money that's going out. And so just to sum it up, we believe that this project is an asset for the entire Bothell community and for the families and individuals with IDD. Anything to add?
I think you've heard us say this. I feel like it's kind of a repetitive thing, but there is a great, great need here for this. And also, it's a very different, as we heard David Boyd share, it's a very different, there is not this type of housing in Bothell, so it's not only for the individuals with developmental disability, but also there's a population of students and young professionals and people that, I think about our typical developing young adults that can't even afford places in Bothell. So it is a much needed asset for the community.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. So with that, I will open it to public comment. This is public comment on this proposal, and again, this is the Drews proposal. There was another proposal that was initially linked that is not part of this, so please, that's not on the table tonight. So Deputy Director Winchell, you let us know who wishes to speak, keeping in mind your 3-minute limit.
The first person signed up to speak is Katie Inquist. And then after Katie is Elizabeth Myers. So since we have several people planning to speak tonight, just if you could be ready toward the end of Katie's 3 minutes, that would be ideal. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Katie Inquist, and I'd like to start out by saying thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate that the current code proposals are somewhat representative of the thoughts and feedback from the community. I assume this is never an easy process, so I appreciate your efforts. When I first heard about this, any pushback from the community was seemingly shrugged off. I was told from some members of city leadership that it must just mean that I don't want to welcome more people into my neighborhood. And this was so off base and made me pretty upset. I wasn't being heard. And I think we do need more housing and more housing options. And we need more community space, more public transportation options. So do I oppose new neighbors in my neighborhood? Absolutely not. Do I oppose a 5-story building as opposed to a 3-story one in my literal backyard? Yes, I do. 5 stories is not a high rise by any means, but it's much taller than the 3 stories currently allowed. It is bordering single-family neighborhoods, and while single-family zoning may soon be a thing of the past, to go from 3 stories to 5 stories in a transition zone in an area where individuals who are adjacent to the zone believed that their homes would be protected from buildings this size of those that are similar to the downtown core, it seemed a bit over the top initially. And I thought if there's a reason to change the zone so drastically, I felt there has to be some facts and data, plenty of concrete justifications, and research conducted to support it. I expected people to visit the areas to see the impact. And if you haven't visited the backyards of some of these homes bordering the transition zone, it is a drastic change. So the proposed code is currently written to allow very specific alterations to this zone to enable housing like the Drews want to provide. And for this reason, I would ask that you please ensure that the language regarding the voluntary incentive of the 50% affordability requirement is clear. Please maintain the requirement that any additional height within this zone is only permitted when the proposed development is topographically lower than adjacent single-family homes. I can't emphasize enough how much this will lessen the detrimental impact on surrounding homes. If there's room for misinterpretation, the city and the community are at risk for many future issues with development within this zone in the affordable housing overlay. While we're at it, I'd like to request that additional requirements for parking and infrastructure be added to code amendments. There must be more sidewalks, traffic calming devices, and there has to be more parking enforcement. If developments are allowed to provide less parking for residents, we need more parking enforcement. We don't have enough parking for patrons and visitors downtown. The residents who live in all these buildings here, they park on the street. As much as we'd like that they didn't, they do. And I believe that it's detrimental to the local businesses and restaurants that we have currently. So I think that's my time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for proposing code that is based on community feedback.
Thank you.
The next person on the list is Elizabeth Myers. And then I did see someone on Zoom with their hand raised, and just so they know, once we get through people in person, we'll pull people from Zoom to speak.
My husband, Bruce,
You might lower the microphone a little closer, so,
is that better?
yes, much.
My husband, Bruce Myers, and me, I'm Liz Myers. We've lived in downtown Bothell for 37 years. We've been trying to help our 41-year-old daughter who has a developmental disability find a safe and affordable apartment so that she can live independently and feel successful. Recently, I have looked at a minimum of 25 one-bedroom apartments in the Bothell area, and so far, the shockingly expensive rental prices have made that impossible with her limited income from SSDI and her part-time job. Are you aware, I'm sure you guys are, that a one-bedroom apartment near Bothell costs anywhere from $1,540 to $1,800 per month, and that does not include any utilities. And as far as Section 8 housing is concerned, there is a 4 to 6 year wait list. We are hopeful in the future for the Drews proposal in that our daughter may possibly be able to live independently in a safe
and affordable environment near us in downtown Bothell.
There's a great need in Bothell for the Drews proposal, especially for people who have developmental disability and with a very limited income. We are supportive of the Drews proposal for the city of Bothell.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
The next two names I have on the list are Rachel Ogerkow and Melinda Davies.
Hi, I'm Rachel Ogerkow. You did pretty good. I'm a pediatric nurse in the North Shore School District. I've lived in Bothell my whole life. And I have a sister, Amy, who's an adult with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room representing that population, as we've talked about, because that population may not be able to represent themselves. So I'm here to advocate in the next couple of minutes for that population. Adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we call it IDD. According to the National Institute of Health, IDD are differences, people with differences that usually present at birth and that uniquely affect the trajectory of the individual's physical, intellectual, and or emotional development. My sister Amy was born with a genetic condition called VCFS. You don't need to bother with what that is. It's actually quite common when it comes to genetic conditions. She has had to overcome many obstacles, including several surgeries, learning challenges, social struggles, and recently she developed a seizure disorder. However, she continues to remain positive and hopeful in her future. She's kind, faithful, friendly. She works part-time here in Bothell at Bone Adventure Senior Living, and she's loves her hometown. The highest goal that she repeats daily, it's her mantra, is to be able to be independent and live by herself. She's 41, and she has the cognitive and social emotional development of someone much younger, which makes it really hard to live independently and really hard to be an adult in a society that runs a lot faster than she does. She's very vulnerable and at risk of physical and emotional harm. She has, over the past 20 years, tried a lot of different living situations, much like many other people. She's lived with her parents, lived with an uncle, she's rented a room, she's had a roommate, and she was married for 8 years, and so she owned a home with her ex-husband. Unfortunately, she endured emotional hardships and abuse in some of those situations, and she's temporarily back home with my parents. This is the case for a lot of adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and we need to provide a place for them. And I feel like Bothell, as I've seen it change and grow too, and I know there's some frustrations there, it's the perfect place. There's access to, excuse me, there's access to the library, sidewalks, buses, grocery stores, services like we've talked about with the Alyssa Burnett Center. And it's just a wonderful place. And it has the foundations needed for individuals with intellectual disabilities.
And your 3 minutes are up. Please bring
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
So we have Melinda Davies next, and then after Melinda is Mark Swanson.
Good evening. Melinda Davies. I'm a resident in the Landing Townhomes, which is kitty corner to the proposed Drews development. I understand that change is inevitable. The development where I live was a change for the neighborhood several years ago. I'm here today to express my concern not over the potential change, but the terms by which the city could allow it. Specifically, if the only way the Drews project works financially is to allow a taller building with less setback and very minimal parking, as a reasonable person, this means that maybe this location isn't the right location for the project. Put simply, to me, it's a math problem. If the math doesn't work without making special exceptions, then we shouldn't force it to happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
So Mark is up next, and then after Mark is Cameron Hilton.
A person would have to be a madman to criticize the Drews project. It's obviously human. But it's also a Trojan horse. If you want to accept the Drews project, I would be the first to vote on it. But it doesn't have to mean citywide code changes. You know it, so does everybody else in the room. OTAC is owned by a Korean company. Now, they're in charge of the middle housing analysis. And I asked one of the OTAC people, hey, have you guys done any shade and shadow studies? You know, we're at the 47th parallel. We're 7 degrees above Moscow, Russia. We're 10 degrees higher in latitude than Seoul, Korea. Here, unless you're going to build a 5-story building in a valley, your topographical considerations are essentially just going to cause the same shadows going downhill unless you're paying attention to south, north, east, and west. On December 21st, the shortest day of the year, a 54-foot house on a level playing field throws a 200-foot-long shadow. And now you're talking about reducing setbacks? You're going to wipe out, I think the rhododendrons around Bothell might be endangered for Pete's sake. I've mentioned it before, when indexed against minimum wage, Bothell is less expensive to rent an apartment than it was 30 years ago. When I moved into a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment on Beardsley Cove Apartments, it was $700 a month and the minimum wage was $425. Now, minimum wage is what, $15.76? To make that, to index off of minimum wage, that means a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment should cost about $2,500 a month. And Artera Woods has all kinds of 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartments for $1,800, $1,900. Check me out. I've called around. There is no crisis. My house 3 years ago was 35% less than it is now. It's not going to stay where it's at. It was already on its way down, minus 17%, when you guys decided to let the builders know we're going to be making all these changes to the code amendments. Now it's back up. You guys, $100,000 for a permit application for a single-family residence?
Thank you.
That's not affordable.
Your time is up.
You're not helping.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
So next is Cameron Hilton, and then after Cameron is Gary Smith.
Hi, my name is Cameron Hilton, and I'm here to speak on the proposal to amend the downtown transition overlay. As was discussed earlier and as was mentioned in the packet, the amendments that we're discussing will apply to the entire downtown transition affordable housing overlay, not just the Drews proposal. So I think it's disingenuous to say we're just talking about the Drews proposal tonight. If separating proposals is a distinction in a name only. I reviewed the code amendments, and I'm pleased that there has been some listening to the community feedback and the progress that's been made. But I'm very concerned that issues of traffic safety, walkability, and parking still aren't addressed anywhere. While these may not be a big concern in the Drews proposal, they are in other areas of the downtown transition overlay. It's important that traffic safety, road conditions, and parking get addressed alongside the other code amendments that have already been outlined and discussed. The way that the code amendments are currently written, proposals in the downtown transition overlay with a scope and location similar to the one that was previously proposed in the Carlson proposal would be able to move forward with limited minor modifications. Just so you understand what this means, this would double the amount of traffic for hundreds of Bothell residents, myself included, that live between Hall Road and 91st, 92nd Avenue Northeast, and rely on those roads to access 522, downtown Bothell, parks, and schools. This neighborhood's roads are already incredibly hazardous for vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians, and contain multiple points where the street narrows to one lane at intersections, has several blind spots, and many sections of incomplete sidewalk. So again, while the proposed amendments may make a lot of sense for the Drews proposal, they don't make sense for a lot of other areas in the downtown transition overlay. I'm asking the city to require an additional code amendment, making it that any upzoning that increases traffic in surrounding roads by more than 20% requires roads within 1,000 feet of the proposal to be brought fully up to code. The Drews proposal would not be impacted by this. They'd easily fall below this 20% traffic threshold, but the addition of this amendment would protect vulnerable neighborhoods like mine. And if this planning commission believes that a 20% traffic increase threshold for requiring road improvements is unreasonable, I'd respectfully like to know at what level of increased traffic my neighbors and I would be deserving of roads that are up to code. My neighborhood has had to live with the consequences of decisions that the city made many decades ago, and the city should have to live with the consequences of those decisions as well, unless they're prepared to make commensurate investments for additional development. Please add language ensuring that any upzoning in the transition overlay that increases traffic
Thank you. Your 3 minutes is up.
requires roads to be brought up to code. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Next person signed up to speak is Gary Smith, and then after Gary will be Corey McDonald.
Good evening. My name is Gary Smith. I've been a resident of Bothell for the last 30 years. And of course, in recent times, we've seen a grand increase in construction and building. I'm here, I think, to speak on behalf of neighbors and neighborhoods. I'd like to talk in terms of gains and losses, ironically. As far as gains are concerned, I see an increase in construction traffic and large construction machinery in our neighborhoods. This will result in a loss of smooth traffic movement in our streets and possible road blockages, maybe a minor inconvenience. I also see an increase in construction noise in our neighborhoods, resulting in a loss of peace and quiet in our neighborhoods during construction of new residences. There will also be an increase in pavement and concrete in our city, an increase in buildings and other structures in our neighborhoods. This will result in a loss of open earth and soil to soak up rainfall and moisture, and thus more water runoff. There will be an increase in population density, resulting in an increase in cars parked on our streets and more traffic congestion, resulting in an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, perhaps, and an increase in poor air quality. On the loss side, we're going to see a decrease in smooth traffic movement due to longer backups on our streets, and a decrease in breathable air, maybe more smog alerts during warm weather. We're going to have more open space with more sunshine and perhaps warmer temperatures. And this results in a decrease in our green canopy, the color green in our neighborhoods due to loss of trees, shrubs, bushes, lawns, and space for backyard gardens. Perhaps there will be an increase in rental prices and taxes, and of course, maybe that makes affordable housing less affordable. I support the Growth Management Act. I voted for it several years ago. However, I urge you to move forward cautiously and be deliberate in your process, in your consideration of these proposals. Thank you. I beat 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and your brevity.
Next person signed up to speak is Corey McDonald, and then after Corey, I will bring in Whitney Holiday from Zoom.
Hi, Corey McDonald. And recently I was on the Bothell website and I came across this image that I've seen multiple times. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with it. It's the missing middle image. Basically, on one side you got single family homes, and the other side, in the very top corner, there's a 5-story building. And what missing middle is proposing is that we've got this middle that's missing, right? But here today, what we're trying to discuss is how we can get that 5-story building right up next to those single family homes. We want to cut out the middle today. So, okay, let's consider this. How can we do this in a way, how can we justify this? A 60-foot tall apartment complex next to a single-family home. And the main issue at hand is the extra height blocking the sightline of those homes and just generally being unsightly when it's juxtaposed next to the small houses around it. So one idea that came up today that I think is very fair is the topography. If a lot is lower, that's changing the sight lines, the shadows, as Mark brought up, all that sort of stuff. I think that's a very fair thing to incorporate. But I think there's a couple of others that haven't been mentioned, and we're jumping to this voluntary incentive instead. And I think what another possible mitigation is to have such a thick and wide green belt that you can't see the building. But getting a 60-foot tall green belt like that is going to take 20 years worth of evergreen growth. So it's not very realistic. And then a third option is to do what this diagram says. And this is to show that this isn't a NIMBY issue. Sorry for some of the people that are adjacent to this, but you can potentially rezone the, if you're going to rezone this property, basically make it a downtown property, then you should rezone the properties around it as well and keep that transition. But what's being proposed here is that if you have meet an affordable housing metric that satisfies public interest, even though it offers no mitigation to the concerns that are being brought up here, then we're just saying, well, our interest is more important than your interest. We're going to do it. And I just don't think it's fair to the surrounding neighbors. And then finally, Mr. Boyd, you mentioned that hitting this 50% mark is going to be a rare occurrence. I highly disagree with that. Oh.
Thank you. Your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I was just going to say both of the proposals here, Carlson and Drews, are both wanting this micro apartment
Carlson
strategy,
is not a
which
part of the discussion tonight, so thank you. Your time is up.
Sure, yeah. But yeah, $5 a square foot is the most profitable way you can do this. Thank you.
The next person signed up to speak is Whitney Holiday. And then if anyone did not sign up to speak but wishes to speak, feel free to come to the podium when Whitney's done speaking. So Whitney, you can unmute yourself and your 3 minutes will start when you start speaking.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, Whitney Holiday here. So I've been kind of listening and I'm familiar with these proposals, but one thing that I was wondering, a lot of this is just predicated on the affordability aspect of this. I mean, it seems like that's the cornerstone of what we're doing here. And I'm just wondering how, we're going to enforce the affordability. Is there going to be a deed restriction? What is to stop somebody from just raising the rents whenever they want to? And then, the other thing, specifically with the Drews proposal that I'm trying to understand is, what makes this development special needs? What ensures that it's going to, does it have a specific build out? Does it have special services in there that are a part of this building that makes it unique versus an ordinary apartment building to serve this community? And is there going to be some sort of requirement of having residents that do meet that profile? Because, I wonder if we have the Drews owners now, if they sell the building to a commercial real estate investor who just says, I don't care about special needs or anything like that. I'm just going to rent it as an apartment building. So I guess I'm trying to understand how these societal goods that are being presented right now are going to, we know that they're going to stay with this property. And then, I also kind of wanted to bring up, I think Trojan horse is like kind of a good analogy that I heard earlier, but, I have a background in commercial real estate, and these small efficiency dwelling units rent for the highest price per foot. And I don't think you need to be a math genius to understand that if two buildings that have 10,000 square feet total, that one that rents for $5 a foot makes more money than the one that rents for $2 a foot. So I can see why developers want to build as many of these small units as they can, but I start to question how great is that for anybody or their affordability? You know, otherwise I've got a $500, a month cardboard box that I can rent for you, Yeah, it's great because it's affordable. So I guess I just wondering, is there going to be a minimum square footage for units like this, or is it just we're just saying it's affordable and we don't really care? So that's my time.
Thank you for your comment.
If anyone else would like to speak, please approach the podium. And make sure, since you're signed up, to say your name when you start speaking.
My name's Sherry McDonald, and I'm a house that borders this overlay zone. I have a whole car. My husband has a whole car. One of my 3 kids has a whole car. Keep that in mind. Do you have a whole car? Keep that in mind when you decide to amend the parking requirement. Most of us have a whole car. And then if you've ever been to Lake City, do you want to move there? That's all I got to say.
Thank you for your comments.
If anyone on Zoom would like to speak, raise your hand, and then again, approach the podium if...
And for those on Zoom who might not be familiar with Zoom, the raise hand icon is at the bottom of the screen.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Michelle Holowichuk, and I've been a longtime resident of Bothell with deep roots here. I also have a son with intellectual and other disabilities. And I am strongly supporting the Drews projects. I support changing the zones and building it 5 stories in the setback and the whole bit. I think they've been very thoughtful about the issues such as parking, and the other, issues related to that lot that have been brought up by the other citizens living nearby. I think, again, I would say, like to Gary and some of the other naysayers, we have these people in our community now. We have to house them. That's the compassionate thing to do. That's the right thing to do. And we need to increase housing density. That's the way to avoid sprawl that destroys our earth. Okay, that's pretty well documented. So a couple of issues that people haven't spoken to that I'll just mention. I mean, the housing crisis for people with disabilities is growing. This district itself has graduated. I don't know how many kids graduated from North Shore this year, 1,500, 2,000 kids, somewhere in that range. 13 to 14% of those people graduate with intellectual disabilities, and they need housing. They need a place to be. This is their village. They need access to services. They need access to all the things we choose when we want to be citizens and we choose to live downtown. Okay, this is a great site for this project. And this is my son's village. This is where his people are, and this is where he needs to be to access the kind of quality of life that we all desire. So I want to mention about there's this bill 1628, right, that's in front of the committee right now, and it deals with modifying local real estate excise taxes and stuff like that. And I think that that's something, that would be useful. That I'm sure the city could benefit from. That's trickling down to communities. That's something that might be helpful. But there are other also indirect economic benefits. Our people with intellectual and developmental disabilities need that support in the space that they're living in typically. That brings in, caregivers and therapists and people who supply equipment for them, and it increases demand for other services that we use as well. And I think that's healthy. I think that's part of a vibrant community. We need this diversity, and I think that this is the way to go. And that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you for your time and for all the different perspectives you have to consider. I appreciate that's difficult.
Thank you for your comments.
The next person signed up to speak is on Zoom, or that's raised their hand to speak is on Zoom, and their name's Maggie. If you can make sure to include your last name for the record. And when you start speaking, your 3 minutes will begin.
Okay. Hi, my name is Maggie Catlin, and I'm a healthcare provider in the community. And I just want to thank you all for being so thoughtful with these code amendments to the entire transition affordable housing overlay. Certainly, the Drew's proposal is offering us a much needed housing option in our community, and I can't think of a much better place to put it than where it is being proposed. I do want to just make sure we're being thoughtful about the entire downtown transition affordable housing overlay and bring some thoughts as to how we can maybe adjust wording or the code in order to make this whole area an opportunity for projects like this in the future. And so one thing I want to bring up is the topography of the area. And so once again, Drew's is in a great place where it's flat and the wheelchair accessibility is great, but there's some other areas of this overlay that the infrastructure isn't as developed, and it wouldn't be as favorable for our communities that have comorbidities or have health conditions. It wouldn't really be walkable to go down some of these hills to where the bus routes are for a majority of Americans who walk 2,000 to 3,000 steps a day, especially those with health conditions. And so I'm just bringing some thoughts of if we can include some wording with improving the infrastructure in some of these other areas. So as they are developed to more dense housing, that they are actually accessible to all and not just those that are in the prime of their health and fitness. And so we can have more developments like the Drew's proposal that are helpful to our entire populations.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, one more from the audience.
Sorry, I was a little late there. Brian Anquist here. I just have a short comment. I just wanted to remind everybody that when we write code, it's not specific to a particular development, whether it's a great case like the Drews or we're a house directly next to a proposed project. We have to remember the code is written for an entire area. And so when we look at the wording, we have to pull ourselves back from, maybe that awesome case and remember that this could potentially be somewhere else, maybe right next to your own home. And so just remember that. Nobody's saying here what the Drews are proposing is bad. Nobody wants, anything like that to be prevented. And so just remember, when you think about code, think about it holistically and not just that one case. That's it.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, my name is Jeanette Lang. I'm a longtime resident of Bothell. We're also here to support the Drews proposition for housing. Both of our children, we met as friends. Our children became friends. And
Could you move a little closer to the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
We met in Bothell. Our sons became friends, and this is their community. Here, I'll let you.
Thank you, commissioners, for hearing us today. My name is Maxine Walker, and I, too, am a longtime resident of Bothell, originally from Canada, and both my kids were born here and raised in the North Shore School District. And as Jeanette stated, our kids became friends, and we became friends. We have a special ed moms group that meet once a month, and our kids go to a class from a special ed teacher with 30 years of experience. So while there's different views about, I don't understand all the coding and the building, and it was kind of abrasive, the one lady that made the comment about, well, what if the Drews decide to sell it? They have a child with a disability. We have children with disabilities, and a lot of the pushback seems to be coming from people that don't know what that feels like, have never experienced to have someone in your home that from the day they were born, they've had disabilities. My son is 25 and my other one is 18. They both have learning disabilities and mental illness. They both have IEPs, just like Jeanette, just like Connie. And unless you live that life, it's not accessible, as that gentleman had stated, the pricing of housing, that they can just go out there, or the different comments that if they're living in a cardboard box, she can just rent them a cardboard box. There's different criteria and requirements for someone with disabilities. They don't need a mansion to live in, but they do need a form of independence with the proper support and with the proper care. I hope that this can be worked out, but as I've lived in Bothell for years, Bothell has gone from a little mom and pop city and developed into so much more. And I've only heard pushback the entire time. This is essential, and I do support the Drews, and I hope it happens, because my son is at home, and my hope is either if the two of them can't live together, that a development like this happens so they can live independently with support. So I don't support all the naysayers, and I hope this happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments? One more from the audience? No? No one else? With that, I think we'll close the public comments. This hearing will be continued, so there'll be another opportunity to comment. Watch your email. So we will now move on to commission discussion. From what we heard, and one of the things we want to talk about is findings. I'll just say for the audience's benefit, the commission has consistently commented on the need for parking enforcement, and in fact made written comments to the council on that. So that might well be a finding we talk about on this one yet again. So, commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Gustafson.
Hello, this is Sarah Gustafson, and I would like to explain that as commissioners, we are not allowed by procedure to respond to specific comments. I would say that this does not mean we accept or condone everything that is said here, even though we cannot respond to specific items.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Any specific findings we'd like to have in other than the one I signaled? Yes, Commissioner Robson.
This isn't regards to finding, although I'm all for it, about parking. I had a question that senior planner just made a comment that a planter mitigates height of the retaining wall. Can you just clarify for me a little bit what that means?
The planters, the special setback landscape buffer isn't specifically related to planters or retaining walls. The example that I showed you under construction, Ross Road Apartments, is using a planter to provide that 10-foot. And so I tried to draft the code in a way that would allow that sort of treatment, or that would allow planters that were adequate in size to provide the type of landscape buffer that would be required, which requires a mix of evergreen and deciduous trees. So it has to be at least 5 feet wide. And the buffer isn't entirely intended to mitigate the additional height. It's required also for even for 3-story developments. So it's more just required, intended to provide a bit of a separation and a visual buffer between the denser development and the less dense development.
Okay, yeah, soften the contradiction between those, or the changes between those different. Okay, thank you.
It would have the effect of breaking up the mass of the wall by having something different in it.
Yeah.
Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. I'll jump in with the retaining wall talk. After reviewing the modifications that have been made from a geotechnical perspective, it makes a lot more sense than what we have currently. And so I just really want to appreciate the thought and effort that went into that. I think that it might not need to be elevated to a finding, but I appreciate the distinction between inward-facing and outward-facing walls. That allows a lot more flexibility while also making sure that we're keeping neighboring properties safe during construction and afterwards too.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
This is Commissioner Westerbeck. So, excuse me, sorry about that. I've long wanted to talk about the transition zone for DT because I work with the code in my work, and I understand, you know, the city proposed 4 stories or 54 feet back in, was it 2009 or so, and then there was pushback, and we settled on 35 feet. Our single family zones right now are all regulated to 30 to 35 feet, 30 with a flat or low slope roof, 35 if you've got a gable, more or less, peaked roof. And yet our transition zone is also 35 feet, so it's not really a true transition. The setback's actually another issue. You can have fewer windows on the 5-foot setback in a transition zone than you can in a single family zone, which is very incongruous to me as well. But it feels like a transition. I mean, if you look at the definition in the dictionary, transition I wrote down earlier, the process or period of change from one state or condition to another, really seems like the DT zone should be more than 35, but not 65. The next zone up from DT is DN, downtown neighborhood, because I live in it, so I know it. It's 65 feet. We go up 30 feet in one jump because we really don't have a transition in DT. So it really probably should have been maybe instead of 54, 40. 4 floors, 40 feet. And I say that because if we also were more flexible about parking for a place which I wonder if this garage would be full very often at the Drews project, you could lop out a layer of parking, bring it down a floor, and you'd really have a 4-story instead of a 5-story. And then if that's propagated all over the city, a 4-story true transition zone might be a more acceptable option. So I know that's, you know, turning everything upside down, but I've been thinking about this for months, actually years. So I'm glad we get to at least talk about it a little bit. So, you know, going from 35 to 65, the transition will be something in between. I understand we can't do spot zoning. It's more or less illegal in our code. So that does mean if we did something on this, it requires, as Mr. Enquist said, something that will possibly happen other places. It will happen other places. I've developed buildings. I mean, you're going to take advantage of the code. So, so I wonder if we propose, you know, in the future something like, or amend this so that because you've got the topography we're talking about, and you got a 30 or 35 foot height limit in a single family zone, which will soon be a residential zone, but it'll still be the same height limit. As long as the new building in the DT zone doesn't exceed that 30 to 35 feet to the measured average height, it'll be fine. That could be something that's measurable, that's surveyable by a surveyor. It's something that's, you know, codifiable. So just something to consider because I don't think that anybody's guaranteed if they have a single family home that they're not going to build. We've all experienced someone building a 3-story building next to us in a single family zone. So this happens all the time. And to say that a multifamily building, if they're otherwise following code, should never be taller than your single family home, it kind of tends to make you feel like multifamily is inferior and the people who live in it are inferior. And as we all know, we really need this kind of housing for all kinds of people. My daughter's IDD also, so she might live in this building if it got built. So I'll probably have a little bias there, but this just goes for all the DT zone. So I just think that the 50% too, it's true, it's gonna remove a lot of people from developing, because it's, maybe some people know this, there was a transit-oriented development bill that died in the legislature this year, and part of that was because they were requiring 20% inclusionary zoning. And that means 60 to 80% average median income, I think, was required. And a lot of developers were weighing in with their numbers, saying, you know, that'll make a lot of projects not pencil out. You can't build something without either subsidy or it has to make enough money for the bank to be happy. And you can't break even. They won't allow that. So it just means basically people are trying to make the bill not happen. And that's understandable. It happens. When we say 50%, it does knock out an enormous number. Almost everyone would not be able to do that. And the way it gets done is by extra height, reduced parking, subsidy, things like that. So, but I agree with some others who tonight, it's kind of it's a much more challenging and maybe mercurial sort of way of reducing the amount of development in these affordable housing overlays. So I just want to come at it from a different angle. Thanks.
Thank you. Other commissioners? So we will be continuing this hearing July 19th. July 19th. We'll discuss this again. Thank you for your work on this, Senior Planner Boyd, and that you've clearly been listening through the process and have made some modifications. While not satisfying everyone, I think that's probably not possible, but clearly there has been some change based on feedback. So thank you for that. And with that, we'll continue this hearing. You have comments?
Just wanted to touch on a couple of points that we will be coming back to you with. The comments we heard tonight about requiring sidewalk improvements, parking enforcement within outside of the frontage of the individual project. That's a notion that just came up today in some of the comments that we received, and I've passed those on to our Public Works Department to comment on the viability of those sort of things. So I'll have that analysis for you last time. And then also take a closer look at the affordability levels with regard to micro apartments. Micro apartments in our, when we looked at this in the general downtown code amendments, the market rate for micro apartments tends to be around 60 to 65%, according to the analysis that we did or that Arch did for us. So where we, when we're imposing an affordability requirement on micros, it was in the 40 to 50% of AMI range. So we'll make sure that that's factored into this as well. I think those are the main points that I wanted to address from the.
Would you comment on the concern that there could be a change of ownership and these requirements could go away?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you asked that. So when we have affordability requirements, what happens is that there is a contract signed, and we work with Arch they help us develop those contracts, negotiate those contracts, and the affordability is for the life of the project. So as long as the building stands, those contracts hold. And those are monitored on an annual basis. So we understand there's going to be turnover. And in fact, the applicants have asked, how much flexibility do they have in terms of, year to year assigning those affordable units. And it is something that can be done on a periodic basis. So there is a mechanism in place to make those contractually and in a way that would continue with a change in ownership and to monitor them on an annual basis.
Thank you. With that, I think we'll continue this. We will continue this hearing, and I think we'll take a brief break and then reconvene for a study session. At which point, I think we'll. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sarah Gustafson here. First of all, lots of gratefulness to both the community and city staff for slowly working towards a solution that might fit. And then my question is about the timeline of future public hearings. Do we anticipate one or more public hearings? And for all the folks who are here who might be interested in when this gets to council, what might be the next 6 months on the docket, if we can look into the crystal ball?
We're hoping to wrap this up in less than 6 months. So the basic idea is that we will come prepared at the next public hearing with full findings and that are ready for Planning Commission to make a recommendation. And if Planning Commission does make a recommendation on July 19th, we are, I don't know if we've actually put it on the agenda yet, or the projected agenda yet, but we're targeting the first meeting after the August break on September 5th for a council study session, and then most likely a council public hearing at the first meeting in October. So that's when we would hope to have adoption of these amendments.
Great, that's really good. Thank you.
Thank you again. And with that, we'll adjourn for 10 minutes. I see 7:35, so let's come back at 7:45. Down there. All right, we are reconvening the June 21st meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission. It is 7:50, and we are coming back with a study session on the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan update on the racial equity analysis and toolkit, the engagement work, and a draft climate element. So, Senior Planner Mant, will you lead us through this?
Yes, thank you. So, as was mentioned, we're going to mostly be talking about the climate element and the assessment and analysis work that went into that draft. Again, it is very much in a draft form. We had a deadline for our climate grant through the Department of Commerce to have that draft ready, so that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. We will be touching on the racial equity component in the context of the climate assessment analysis and the element as well. So what we're just asking tonight is to review the draft climate change element that we provided, the goals and policies in there that we at least have drafted at this point. And then we're also going to provide a quick update on the engagement efforts that have happened since the last meeting, as well as what's going to be happening throughout the summer. We have some more concrete information there. And then as a quick reminder, we're just wanting, this is a slide you'll see a lot as we're going through, just to remind what we've done, where we're at, where we're going. We're at the very tail end of Q2, so we have our draft climate change plan. We're working on a draft racial equity analysis and toolkit we'll have in the next couple weeks, and then continuing engagement and working on our land use alternatives, which will be the next meeting's focus in July. That'll be July 5th. We'll be focusing on land use, just land use specifically. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Lisa Gruder from Burke. She's a principal at Burke and has been leading the climate work for us and doing a fantastic job. And she will be presenting their work thus far. And with that, I will hand it over to Lisa.
Thank you very much. I also want to mention my colleague Adam Greer is here. He helped with the policy review and is on hand for questions. And also he and I will be making changes as a result of feedback we get tonight and through the end of the month and beyond, as Kirsten mentioned. So I think this slide represents the topics we'll cover on the next few slides. And so first is the purpose and the background and under the Growth Management Act for the climate element. And then, as Kirsten mentioned, we'll share some early engagement results and also climate vulnerability analysis that we've conducted thus far. And that will lead into the goals and policies that you've had in your packet and our next steps, which will be that we'll continue to refine this, but we'll circle back to that at the end. Thank you. Next slide. So first, the climate element. Just this last session, the requirement for a climate element passed in HB 1181. And it is to include two sub-elements, a greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element and a resiliency sub-element. And we'll cover at a high level what's required in those two components. And I guess before we give you more of the regulatory side, just some definitions. They are in the U.S. Climate Toolkit and referenced in the Washington Department of Commerce model climate element. But climate resilience being the capacity of a community, business, or natural environment to prevent, withstand, respond to, and recover from a disruption. And adaptation is to reduce risk to valued assets. And mitigation is to try to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions or remove them from the atmosphere. So those are the definitions we're working with for the purposes of the climate element tonight. So on the greenhouse gas reduction side, the element should identify actions that would result in reductions to overall greenhouse gas emissions generated by transportation and land use, and result in reductions in per capita vehicle miles traveled, and ensure that the reductions benefit overburdened communities and ensure that those communities can realize the co-benefits of reduced air quality, pollution, and environmental justice. And then the resilience sub-element, which has been the focus of the grant that the city received from the Department of Commerce, and is the focus, frankly, of the vulnerability assessment that we'll share, would be to prioritize actions that benefit overburdened communities most impacted by natural hazards due to climate change. And I just want to mention that there are other hazards that the city plans for, like earthquakes, that are not necessarily as connected to climate change. So there are other hazards the city will address and has addressed in its emergency plans, but tonight we're focused on hazards relevant to climate change, or most relevant. The element also needs to identify, protect, and enhance natural areas to foster resiliency. That would be critical areas and tree canopy and things of that nature. Identify, protect, and enhance community resiliency factors such as social, economic, and built environment factors. And address natural hazards that are aggravated by climate change: landslides, flooding, drought, heat, smoke, and wildfire. So first, to share with you what information we've been considering as we've been working on the assessment. First, on the climate change and risk side, the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group developed a tool that followed from a legislative proviso, state legislature. They created a climate resiliency tool that is at a county level, and in some cases is more granular than that. And that's been helpful for overall trends. There's information from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, National Risk Index, and Snohomish County has been working on a vulnerability assessment. The report is out there. The mapping tool is still in production to share with the community later. And our firm was supporting that effort, so we're somewhat familiar with the findings to date. On the environmental and social side, we're looking at critical areas, landslides and flooding in particular. We've used US Census data about population, and we've looked at the Washington Environmental Health Disparities mapping, as well as other mapping tools that get at environmental disparities. So tree canopy and urban heat islands, or the Trust for Public Lands has a park serve that looks at the distance to parks, and they also have mapped heat islands that we will share in a moment. And then a tree equity score, and then a displacement risk analysis, one that Puget Sound Regional Council, PSRC, has generated, and also the City of Bothell has commissioned a displacement risk map that we'll share in a few minutes. So some of the climate trends that come from the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group tool, and I should say that this slide is presenting information for 2050 compared to the historic period. So we'll update that on the slide. But in terms of looking ahead compared to historic trends, it's anticipated that in King and Snohomish County, there would be just above a 6-degree Fahrenheit change in the average summer maximum temperature. And then another way to look at the change in extreme heat is through looking at a combined humidity and heat index called Humidex. And that would be an additional 20 days anticipated above 90 degrees humidex in the summer. And that's important for public health, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then in terms of wildfire, while the risk is greater in the tree canopy in the Cascades, the city could be affected by smoke, and there's anticipated to be 10 additional days in high fire danger, which would be like less moisture in the soil, and other conditions that increase the potential for wildfire. And then on the other side, extreme precipitation and flooding. So these are percent differences from historic information, and it's a median, sort of mid-range prediction. So 15% change in the magnitude of the 25-year storm, and similarly a 15% change in the magnitude of the 2-year storm. And those are notable for helping us understand what implications there could be to stormwater systems. And then in terms of flooding, anticipated increases in peak stream flows, more areas could be flooded. And here we have a little bit more granular information, up to 11% increase in Sammamish River and 14% in North and Swamp Creeks. And then in winter, it's anticipated there would be less stored water in snow, and the snow melt would happen sooner than it has been historically. So that could change the flows in the summertime and have historic lower flows. So minus 5 to 6% on the different water bodies there. Considering those changes that are broadly indicated, you can then kind of look at it in the context of on-the-ground conditions in Bothell. So where would be more vulnerable if those trends were happening? So heat islands, where there's more pavement and less trees, which are in that speckled orange, and this is from the Trust for Public Land. You could expect to see the temperatures being more intense there than in treed places. And then, as we were mentioning with extreme precipitation trends, the floodplains, there could be changes to the current mapped floodplain boundaries. And then with extreme precipitation events, you could also anticipate the potential that there would be more frequent risk of landslides. And then in terms of who could be more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, there's been studies and information from institutes and universities that look at the effects on different populations, and those that are older and those that are very young can have issues with extreme heat, for example, and those that live alone as well are more prone, more at risk for having issues with extreme events, either heat or evacuation, getting information about how to evacuate. Persons of color may have more pre-existing health conditions and have less ability to recover after an event, or those that speak English less than very well may also need more attention in terms of the kinds of information that's available before, during, and after an event. And then outdoor jobs, so construction jobs would be a category of jobs. There are other jobs that tend to be outdoors as well, park maintenance, and others that would be falling in that category. So we've done some mapping and took in some information for the Bothell area for a community profile. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see a population density that shows by race and ethnicity sort of different concentration areas. And That just could be useful to take a closer look at more specific information. But if there's folks that speak other languages or that have additional risk factors, such as persons of color, you could similarly look at maps of lower income. That is also a risk factor. It's useful to use this as a starting place to say where are there particular areas we should pay more attention to. And so you can see some, oh, I can go back. You can see some areas that might be worth taking a closer look near some of the major corridors. Then we have the health disparities map as well from the Washington State Department of Health, which also looks at different exposures to different air quality and noise and socioeconomic factors similar to what we described for climate change. And then the map on the right is a displacement risk map. So this would be risk of displacement, loss of housing, essentially, of housing that is there that could affect some communities more than others. And so this is a map that's useful for your housing element and looking at how to identify and develop anti-displacement measures. And Kristen, if there's anything more you want to share there, feel free.
I think we're good to move on to the next one.
And then in terms of engagement, as the comprehensive plan engagement process has launched, we took the opportunity as part of the grant to ask questions around climate change effects and priorities of different communities. So in the formation of a working group for the comprehensive plan update, a sounding board, there's been some questions asked at their first meeting last month, some one-on-one interviews to help us develop the engagement strategy, and then some targeted outreach, such as to a high school student group. And so some of the themes we heard back in that early engagement were around ensuring that the approach to climate change resilience addresses equity, best communication practices and education, focuses on compact, affordable, and complete communities, emphasizes tree canopy and green infrastructure solutions, and addresses energy conservation, clean air, and cooling. And you can see some of the quotes from those early events about promoting walkability, focusing on elderly, children, and unhoused, and looking at building codes to support people installing air conditioning. So that's a lot of the background information that informed us. And then we used the Model Climate Element guidebook to do our policy screen across 11 different sectors. And so through these lenses, we looked at your current policies and thought of potential suggestions or high-performing strategies from a few different sources. The Commerce Guidebook is suggesting in doing this review that between your existing policies and maybe amendments or new policies that you try for 2 to 4 goals and policies in each sector as a guide. So we'll walk through some of these sectors. And our approach was first to identify assets, and that's people, places, and infrastructure that are important to consider and explore the hazards, and then review existing plans for gaps and opportunities. So our focus was on the comprehensive plan, but we also took a look at natural hazards plans and emergency plans that the city will be amending over the same time period as the comprehensive plan. And then looking at areas of sensitivity, how well the community or built environment can adapt to climate vulnerability. and how vulnerable are people and places, and then identifying potential draft goals and policies that could then be folded into the comprehensive plan update. And so, as was mentioned earlier, we see this as a very early step, and we can continue to refine and enhance as we move along. So some of the strategies we looked at were certainly ones you have identified in your current comprehensive plan. And then the Department of Commerce, as part of its model element, developed a menu of measures that they developed with 6 different agencies and experts in the field that are high-performing strategies to help address climate adaptation or mitigation. So we considered those, and some of them that are in the sweet spot that help both with greenhouse gas reduction and with adaptation are things like the ones in green in the middle of the diagram there, urban forest, renewable energy, working with nature, which would be like the green infrastructure, stormwater solutions, having complete and connected communities, and retrofits. Those are sort of the sweet spot. The other source that we looked at was K4C, which is the county and city collaborative around climate change, and Bothell is a member of that. And they put out a climate toolkit a couple of years ago that also looks at high-performing measures. So those are the sources we were looking at so far for strategies. And just to try to connect things, for examples, when we were looking at vulnerabilities, we were looking at assets, the hazards that could affect the assets, which again are people, places, or infrastructure, vulnerabilities of the assets and risks, and gaps and opportunities. And just to give you a couple of examples on the chart on the right, in terms of increased demand for cooling in the summer on the third line there, some of the example strategies are ways to design buildings and sites for passive cooling and renewable energy. Or down at the bottom, 2 rows there, degradation and loss of habitat and trees. The strategies would be around protecting, enhancing, and restoring ecosystems. Or if there was damage to housing and risk of displacement due to climate events that damage the housing stock, looking at ways to weatherize the units or other adaptation measures that can be considered. So we'll walk through some of these as we walk through the policy ideas that flow from this analysis. So Kirsten, as we're getting into the slides on the vision statement and goals and policies, I imagine it would be okay to pause here or there if there's questions on particular things on the slides. At least that was my anticipation. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I think because there's enough content in each of these components, it would be good to maybe digest it kind of slide by slide so you're not getting confused and wanting to go back. So I think that will be good.
Okay. And so maybe before we dive into the vision and the policies, just maybe see if there's any questions. We threw a lot at you in the slides that we just presented to see if you have any follow-ups on that.
So commissioners, questions or comments? Commissioner Curd?
Thanks. Yeah. One of the questions I have is about low impact development techniques, and specifically in terms of buildings. I know that there have been regulations that have been proposed at the state level for like passive house or other architectural improvements and incentivization of cross-laminated timber and other kind of forward thinking for at least Washington development standards and practices. And is this climate element something that we could incorporate some of those more specific building practices into, or is low development or low impact development kind of a broad reaching term in the use throughout this document?
Yeah, I'd welcome other staff input, but generally, low-impact development typically refers to distributed stormwater systems that mimic natural conditions or integrate natural hydrologic conditions. But what you're describing in terms of green building techniques and passive cooling and cross-laminated timber, I think, are another category of measures that I think are worth considering. So I think we're interested in the types of strategies that come to mind for you, and then we can integrate them into our draft language. I think those are great ideas that you've mentioned. We do mention passive cooling. We don't talk a lot about cross-laminated timber. There may be other things that we want to make sure are at least examples that you'd like to see.
Yeah, and I can add on to that a little bit as well. One of our goals with this is to both have a dedicated climate element, but also make sure we're reflecting climate-related policies throughout the plan. So it's possible that we could have some of that language in the housing element, for example, of having some more specific language to housing development practices and building development practices, both potentially in the climate element, but also elsewhere, sort of kind of sprinkled throughout. Another thing we're planning on doing to kind of make that clear is use kind of iconography to delineate in all of the elements that this, for example, the land use element, there might be some components of that that are really specific to climate change. So it's clear that while we do have a standalone element, we're making sure that it's very well integrated throughout the plan. So some of maybe those more specific strategies could be spoken to in a more general policy in the climate element, and maybe more explicit elsewhere where it makes sense too. So those might be some of the things we're considering as we continue to draft the language.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Yeah, thank you for this. This is great. And I read the packet. It took a little while, but I looked at all of it. It's fantastic. I'm glad we're doing this. I'm trying to understand more broadly. So this was something that was handed down legislatively. And I see we're going to have an implementation plan, goals and policies. It's a state requirement, if I understand right. That's correct? It's tied to legislation?
For the climate element, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then as well, before this, there was a requirement for monitoring, so there could be a 5-year report on how things are going.
That's what I was curious about. The sort of teeth behind it at the state level for each city or whatever the jurisdiction. Obviously, it's the city here in this case. So it sounds like this will. The idea is this is going to be shaping our policy as planning commission and councils, and as a city, we each time we kind of open up our code and develop policies and things like that. Is that the idea that are we reporting back to the state or to the PSRC or something like that? I'm just trying to understand like the larger teeth behind it too, because I endorse it. It's great stuff.
Sure. Well, certainly the climate element is a new requirement, and so the city will integrate it, as Kirsten mentioned, into a chapter, as well as show how it's related to other elements. But in terms of monitoring, that came into being when the state went from 8 years cycles for the comprehensive plan periodic update to 10-year cycles. And so making sure things are on track, put in a requirement for a 5-year monitoring.
Okay, so it's kind of monitored 5 years, the halfway point between comp plans. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
There are some specifics in that relate to this, like vehicle miles traveled is one of the things to be monitored.
So there's some benchmarks and sort of data that we'll try and hit. Okay, cool.
I think housing, some aspects of housing will also be monitored, and also I think permitting.
Okay.
But there's more to come from Commerce on that, I think.
Okay. I was just curious about like that overall idea. And I say that because, we all see city plans and goals and visions and everything, and there's the old cliche. Then we put it on a shelf. And I know this is not that because we have some reporting and some benchmarks and stuff to hit. So I was just trying to understand, what, and I understand better now where the sort of, like I said, the teeth or the implementation will be pushed from. So I understand better now. Thank you.
Yeah, I can also add that one of the council priorities is a climate action plan.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a component of our implementation that will start basically as soon as we're done
Yeah,
with the comp
yeah.
plan too.
And I know our current council is very interested in that, so, thanks. Just, I like it, so I don't want it to be put on a shelf, that's all. No, I want to make sure that we're actually going to like walk our talk.
Others? Seeing none, let's proceed.
Right. So on this slide is a proposed vision statement specific to the climate element. And it is meant to get at both the mitigation side and the adaptation side. And because there's a lot of related systems and considerations for climate change, you'll see there's quite a number of bullets there that we were trying to capture. So we're interested in general feedback on whether you like having a vision statement associated with a specific element, and if this is headed in the right direction. It's a fairly detailed vision statement in a way.
Commissioners? I guess my first reaction is it's a lot of bullets, and then my second reaction is I don't know what you'd want to remove. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and I think you've covered it. Others? Commissioner Robson?
Can I ask the difference between provide opportunities for accessible and affordable homes, and then, oh, I see. Now that I'm reading it out loud, it makes more sense. Ensure mobility and connectedness. The connectedness, the accessible, it seems like there's some really similar goals. Can you clarify just a little bit the difference? I mean, so it's mobility connectedness. Is that, can you clarify the difference between those two bullet points a little bit? I'm right there on the cusp of getting it.
Sure, I think we could do some wordsmithing here, but mobility and connectedness was really multimodal, so transit, ped, bike, vehicle. And connectedness is just better connectivity for things like evacuation or just being able to move around the community on a greenhouse gas reduction point of view, like a VMT reduction. What I think we were meaning by accessible and affordable homes, so accessible universal design for all abilities, and then affordable. So we could work on that language because I see your point. There's some crossover with accessible and connectedness. Yeah.
I just want to second Commissioner Kiernan's point that it does seem like a lot of bullet points as an overview. I know that we are going to go in and get more specific in other places, and that's just my first, when you do use bullet points, it's best idea to like limit it to like a few to make that impact, and we want to come out with a bang. So that would be my first thought too.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other commissioners? Yes.
Sarah,
we could go to the next.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah
Is there
Gustafson
any-
here. I'm trying to think of when one of our community members opens up the comprehensive plan, where would they see this climate element vision there? If they were really concerned about climate element, how would they find it?
So the way that the comprehensive plan is currently put together is in separate elements as PDFs. That doesn't necessarily mean that's how we're going to format it. That's part of the discussion is what is the best format for how this is going to look. But it's basically a chapter within the book of the comprehensive plan. So this would be in the first page or two of that chapter of the entire comprehensive plan is sort of the preamble or sort of setting the stage for the goals and policies that will come after. Mm-hmm.
Others?
So
Let's proceed.
are we ready to
Yes,
move?
yes.
Yeah, I think we're
please.
okay to move
Thank
on.
you. I'm sorry. So the state provisions in the law were to have a mitigation sub-element, and you have some existing language in your current comprehensive plan that gets at mitigation of greenhouse gas. And so the top paragraph, we've basically broken what is a very long policy into a couple pieces. One is sort of a preamble to the mitigation sub-element, and then a goal that would be made out of current policy to participate in greenhouse gas emission reduction efforts to fulfill Bothell's climate vision. So just want to say we're trying to make use of existing policies that you have.
Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. I like that we start out strong to define why we're getting into climate change element, but I do feel that there's some terminology. I know that it's under construction. There's some terminology and some framing here that might be a little leading or guiding. And I'm wondering if maybe when we talk about the causes of climate change and the theories, I think that people here understand that climate change is happening and has been happening, and that we are feeling the effects now, starting to feel the effects now. And so I would just encourage during the development of the language in this section to be very bold, and also, these are all the elements of the vision in this climate change chapter or element. They are all providing multiple benefits regardless of the cause or the element behind climate change. I think that each one of these actions in our vision can stand on it. They can stand on their own. And so I just encourage that the language crafting and wordsmithing that goes on for this portion allows each element of the vision to stand on its own. That's all I'll say.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I want to second Commissioner Curd's call to be bold with this. I don't think we need to placate flat earthers. I don't think that we need to dance around. I really feel like the science is there. We don't need to accommodate every viewpoint when we have the facts, and we can be bold. And if it needs to be, if the council feels like they want to fudge it a little bit, that's okay. But experts theorize this could lead to. Experts agree. Experts know that. Whether climate change is caused by human activity or natural, why are we putting that in? Or maybe it's caused by owls. I mean, do any of us know? Yes, actually we do. We know. We don't need to, maybe it's a wizard. We know. We don't need to go through every case it might be. Let's just take that out. The prudent approach is to establish policies. Again, I get what they're trying to say is to be open to all residents, but I don't think we need to be quite as diplomatic when it comes to science. We can just say things that are true, and then if people want to, soften the language on council, they can soften it as necessary. But I support the idea to be bold, speak the truth. Let's just take all that out so that we're very clear on why we're making these changes. We're not just being careful. We're making the changes because we have to, because that's what science says. Or we're all going to die. Sorry. That's just my perspective on it. I don't know.
And I can provide a little bit of historical knowledge on some of the language. My understanding from prior planners is this was agreed upon by the council in 2015, so it is helpful to get feedback now that we're going back and re-reviewing all of it.
Oh, absolutely. I hope nobody thinks I was casting blame. yes, I took that for granted that it's old language. Yeah.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
I concur with Commissioners Curd and Robson.
And along those lines, I would be inclined, the first paragraph says a lot of things, but then right at the top of the goal, you talk about greenhouse gas emissions. I would be inclined to pull greenhouse gas emissions up into the first sentence. Climate change is a phenomenon that atmospheric and climate experts, agree is exacerbated by greenhouse gas emissions. And because when you talk about reducing them, you need to say why. But it's my inclination.
Great.
Any more comment
Others?
We'll definitely work on that. Is there more there? Or should we kind of?
Okay, let's proceed. I think we.
Okay. I wanted to mention we're referencing the goal on transportation, but we didn't bring all the policies, and there's quite a number of them that are in your packet, because it's been my understanding that you had a session on transportation a couple weeks back that covered a lot of that territory. So we're going to focus more on other topics, but I wanted to call that out. So in terms of then goals, CC2 energy, reduce community-wide energy use and infrastructure emissions and promote green building practices. So when we have the parentheses there, K4C, that's some recommended language from that county city collaborative that I mentioned earlier. And then some of the policies, we couldn't fit on the slides all of the policies for all the topics, so we thought we'd hit some highlights. So if you've made notes in your packet, let us know. But here are just a few things about encouraging and incentivizing energy efficiency, conservation methods, and sustainable energy in public and private development. That is part of a current policy. Encouraging or incentivizing new development to use low emission construction practices, low or zero net lifetime energy, and green building, part of an existing policy. And increasing and encouraging the use of low emission vehicles such as electric vehicles. What we were seeing in your current policies is there was more attention being paid to some topics, and you'll see as we progress, there are more suggestions from these other sources, but this happened to be an area where you had quite a number of policies around energy conservation and reduction. Let us know if anything struck you there, otherwise we can go on to the next.
Yes.
Yeah, I do have another question about the broader scope of the plan. I'm really excited about everything here. Is there other sections that specifically deal with the environment or conservation, or is this mostly where the environmental actions are housed, even though it's just for climate change?
Are you asking about currently or what we're sort of planning on doing?
What
right.
the future might look
so
like?
Currently we do have a natural environment element, and the existing policies that we've made note of and you'll continue to see specifically related to climate change are within our current natural environment element. And we, at this point, we could combine them if that's something that would be of interest. We could keep them separate to have more of the specific focus between climate and environment. So that's still, those options are still there.
Yeah, I think that might be, thank you, Senior Planner Matt. I think that might be an interesting discussion to have, because on the one hand, we really want to highlight climate as a top priority. On the other hand, it's so integrated with everything else we would do for our natural environment. The reason why I asked this is because I'm looking through here and I'm like, why isn't there anything about tire dust in here? Because that's something our constituents are very concerned about. And then I realized, well, this is climate. How would this speak with other concerns that might not fit within the climate bucket?
Yeah, and that relates back to what we were mentioning about having climate-related policies throughout the plan. So it's possible if we want to continue to have a natural environment element that speaks to things separate from climate change-related goals and policies, there might be some climate change-related goals and policies that may be more specific to something like conservation or more specific natural environment-related policies. So that's a way we could think about integrating it throughout the plan too.
Commissioner Upson?
I agree with Commissioner Gustafson that I understand that conservation is different than greenhouse gas emissions, and that it makes sense to have those two separate, but I don't know how clear that will be when people go seeking information. And so we may just want to hip in the preamble talking about the overall goal of conservation and blah, 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 just hitting that mark and something along the lines of, as will be covered in the sections, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't need to be more of a sentence, but so that when people go seeking this information, anybody who does, I'm sure there have to be at least a few people, they do have that guarantee, and sort of it directs them a little bit more to be like, oh, okay, that's not going to be addressed here, but it's part of their vision. Yeah, so I think that would be helpful.
And that also brings up some of our discussions we've had about formatting of the document and kind of how to cross-reference between sections so people know how to navigate it better and it's more easily navigatable. Because right now, because it's in separate PDF forms, it's not as easy as some of the other formatting that we've seen and talked about at our previous meetings. So that's a helpful comment.
So climate is clearly an important issue with the environment, but there are broader issues that are, such as stormwater, which again has a climate element.
I think they've become synonymous with for a lot of people. They go climate, they think broad overall environment, which is not wrong, frankly. So I think in the more ways we can direct people to what they're looking for and give them a sense of the overall goals, I think would be super helpful.
Any more discussion there? Okay, let's proceed.
So continuing on the mitigation side, we have a goal on waste reduction, two of them, reducing community-wide consumption and waste emissions and supporting recycling of construction waste. So a couple of examples, by 2030, achieve zero waste of resources that have economic value across commercial households and construction sources. And then another example, incentivize recycling of construction and demolition debris and developing a program to enable recycling of all construction and demolition debris.
Commissioner Curd?
Yeah, in this section, when I think of waste reduction in terms of climate action, a lot of education and outreach programs around Puget Sound are geared towards food waste reduction, and I'm wondering if that could be plugged into this somehow too. It's not even on the same order of magnitude as, construction waste, which is tremendous, but it's something that people can feel a connection to, and like a personal connection to the city's overarching goals. And so I'm wondering if maybe this is a good section for that, or maybe there's another section. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a couple possibilities, and this seems like a good one, and we'll work on some language to wrap that in. The other place I'm thinking is there's a section on food systems later on that might be a good fit also.
I think that's a good opportunity for a cross-reference, because when you look at greenhouse gas emissions from disposed of food waste, there's a significant amount, not to give away my past life. But, and the other thing I would say, as far as, again, from past experience, incentivizing recycling of construction demolition debris, one fairly easy step is requiring that a building permit application includes a construction waste recycling plan. Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Any
you.
more comments? And we might move on to the next slide, unless someone has. Nope. Okay.
Okay, proceeding.
All right, so this would be the last part of the mitigation side of things. So a goal on community development and conservation and fostering a sustainable, affordable, and prosperous community. And just a couple of examples there: encouraging growth within your activity center to support mass transit and reduce commute trips. So that's part of an existing policy. And then when recommended in the climate toolkit for the King County Cities Collaborative K4C, using natural systems to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, to retain existing urban forests and promote urban forests on lands not anticipated to develop.
Commissioners? Commissioner Curd?
I think this might be a resiliency measure, but in terms of, yeah, you know what? Never mind. I'm going to save it for then. Sorry.
All right, other comments? Okay, next goal.
So here we switch into the resilience sub-element, and we are proposing a framework goal to kind of set the overall sub-element. And so this would be formulate and implement climate change adaptation strategies that address the impacts of climate change on public health and safety, economy, infrastructure, water resources, and habitat. And that's an existing policy, and it seemed like it was a fitting for the rest of the section.
Comments? I see some head nodding. Okay, I think you have general support.
And then here we get into food systems. And so a goal with some parts: enhance Bothell's food systems to increase community food security, support local and traditional foods, and advance an equitable local economy. And then so some of the measures here from the high performing examples: identifying suitable locations for community gardens, encouraging and supporting farmers markets, and supporting food banks and neighborhood food pantries. So here we drew from some engagement results that you had in your Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan, that's pros, and also mentioned in the Commerce menu of measures. Any thoughts here?
Comments?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I do have a comment about the food systems, which is, of course, one of my favorites because we all like food. And it revolves around food and exploring zoning to allow small groceries in residential neighborhoods. And this comes from discussion with commissioners and community members. Because this is both mitigation, it decreases trip length, and it could also be related to resilience. If there's a smoke event or a snow event, then it's much easier to get to a place to get food if you can walk there. So.
Commissioner Upson? Yeah.
I'm very much in support of that as well. Thank you, Commissioner Gustafson.
I see a thumbs up and heads nodding, so I think we all agree that that's an important element.
Great.
So, and I'm looking at, perhaps it's on the next slide, there was one more policy, including encourage food-related enterprises at business parks. I would say, and beyond business parks and neighborhoods.
Yes, that would be an example where we were just highlighting things, but yeah, that would be a great policy to alter to address what you've just discussed.
Okay, moving on.
So buildings and energy, and this is from the adaptation side. So designing and retrofitting buildings to be more adapted to climate events. So goals here: construct and adapt buildings to be more resilient to extreme heat and cooling demand, support renewable energy sources, and reduce the risk of flood damage in floodplains and urban flooding locations. So from the menu of measures, developing or modifying design standards to integrate exterior building features that reduce impacts of climate change. So you do this in your downtown with awnings and other weather protection, but there may be opportunities to have a more continuous system. So awnings, cool roofs, green roofs. And then the second one is supporting increased awareness of incentives available for early action under the Clean Buildings Act, and prioritizing low and no cost home retrofit packages for low income and marginalized communities. That's from the K4C. And the staff may know where you're headed with the building code changes. And then the other is offering flexibility in building height, floor area, and other standards to come into compliance with flood resistant construction or encouraging retrofits.
Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. Would you help me understand more about EE design? I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Is it in the packet maybe?
Line 145.
Sorry.
I think
Okay.
it's engineering envelope design.
Yeah, deep EE design. Adam, maybe you could look in the K4C climate toolkit and see if they define that. I thought of it as energy.
Okay. I'm looking
Energy and
at it now.
environmental, perhaps, but maybe you can help me with that term and we'll.
Yes.
So clearly, if we're confused, it needs to be clarified.
Oh, for sure.
And I am looking back to the energy section, and clearly this crossover. The energy section talks about green building and solar ready. A lot of that would apply here. So I'd say look at how the interrelationship of these.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess that's the comment.
Sure.
Commissioner Curd?
Yeah, I would second that there's some overlap, and it would be good to either distinguish between what specifically is meant to be an adaptation versus a mitigation. That's not the point of my comment, though. One of the things that I work on extensively is I help households who have homes that were developed before modern stormwater codes and laws were implemented to retrofit their homes. And so that's something that with climate change, we're expecting more frequent and more high intensity storm events in the winter. And that's sort of an adaptation, is to make sure that those houses and those homes are kind of ready and not prone to flooding and exacerbating those effects. And so there's definitely some like vulnerability aspects too, because you know, older homes might require kind of a lot more work, but I think that's something that could be easily included in a policy. And on lines 153 and 4, it's talking about new development requiring green infrastructure, but I think retrofits of, certainly there are some old homes in Bothell that probably aren't ready for climate change. And so that's something that I'd suggest adding.
Sure.
Other commissioners? All right, moving to the next.
One thing that we think EE means energy efficiency, and our source document is not, I guess, well footnoted. So we'll confirm that, but we think EE is energy efficiency. So. Cultural resources and practices. So here we're suggesting goals around enhancing ecosystems to conserve culturally important resources and then protecting significant historic sites. So example policies: protecting, enhancing, and restoring ecosystems to meet tribal treaty rights and conserve culturally important consumptive and non-consumptive resources. So foods, medicinal plants, and I suppose we could list some on it. And then protecting significant historic sites prone to floods and other hazards worsened by climate change. So these are coming from the menu of measures.
Commissioner Curd?
Okay. I really appreciate this section. And I'm also very curious about tribal input. And so this is just a general overview question, but is the city of Bothell going to be soliciting feedback from tribal representatives and intergovernmental panels?
Yeah, we have contact information for all of the tribes that are recognized to have some relationship to the lands within the city of Bothell, and they're part of our contact list, and part of the ongoing engagement will include tribes. And I know we've talked about that with our consultant team and our outreach team, so that'll kind of be an ongoing point of discussion, particularly as we get into the drafts as well. That's also going to be a component of the history work that we do with our historic preservation consultant, particularly the telling Bothell's full story component that will serve sort of as the history and preamble to the entire plan itself. So
cool, thank you.
Okay, next goal.
Great. Economic development. So here we have a few goals. Encouraging green technology businesses, and secondly, holistic green building and adaptation, and adapting outdoor recreation sites to support cultural events, ensuring business continuity, supporting Bothell commuters, and providing small business resilience strategies. And we have on the following slide some policies that are relevant to this. So I guess there's two aspects. There's the opportunity to grow businesses that help the economic resilience of the community, and then the design and connectivity to those businesses, and recognizing that commuting is also an aspect of what, people that live in Bothell and commute out, and vice versa.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. Could you just clarify me on line 167, how adapting outdoor recreation sites to support cultural events? I think that's super important. I just don't see how it plays into climate change. How did you envision that going together?
Yeah, I think that's related more to, the community having outdoor events like along Sammamish River, and, it brings in visitors, and there might be, related sort of economic considerations. So, or in major parks, other events that you would hold that bring in basically a boost to the local economy with those events. So that's the connection there, and we could try to work on the language to make that more explicit.
While I think that's a super valuable and important goal for us, I think I'm not really clear on what it has to do with climate change, bringing in business through festivals.
Sure.
I'm all for, but particularly how that relates to climate change is just where I'm a little unclear.
So this would be like extreme heat events where you have to cancel, planned outdoor events. community events or wildfire smoke. And so I think that would be that connection. And there might be more demand for indoor space for recreation that's maybe less related to economic development, but canceling events, after preparing for them is, I think, probably the primary thing here.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Commissioner Curd?
Yeah, I would suggest maybe reworking that a little bit. I was really unclear on that too, and so that makes sense.
Yeah.
What you just said makes sense, but
Sure.
reading 167, that doesn't.
We won't all have the benefit of your clarification just reading it here. So if, changing the language a little bit, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's Commissioner Westerbeck. This is an idea, and I'm not sure if it belongs here or here astride with, or shares something with zoning and development, but we've had a lot of conversations the past few years with council and with the local Chamber of Commerce, which is really active, about more building diversity. We get a lot of 5/1 buildings, which are great. We need them, but a lot of businesses don't have places to land here, which affects small businesses and business continuity and everything. So anyway, I'm saying sort of this building stock diversity. Jane Jacobs used to talk about how you need old buildings for new businesses and entrepreneurs, and we don't really have much of that here. So I kind of wonder if that's something that we can encourage or codify or put down. And I'm sort of challenging you because I don't know what that would be yet. But I just wrote down encourage commercial building stock diversity and variety.
Okay.
And so again, I don't know if we slip that into zoning and planning more, but it affects economic development, which is why I bring it up. So sorry to give you something so abstract, but it's just something the community's talked about quite a bit.
I imagine that might land more in the land use element, but
Yeah.
I do believe in the Canyon Park sub-area plan, there was some attention paid to that topic with having a variety of space sizes for affordability.
Yeah, I remember that. You're right. Yeah. And not displacing existing businesses and so forth. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I was going to make that exact comment.
Yeah.
That did come up in the prior discussion. It should be reflected in this plan as well.
Yeah, agreed. It's become more and more of an issue, so appreciate that.
Anything else on economic development?
Hi,
Commissioner Gustafson?
Sarah Gustafson here. I am feeling very uncertain about line 172 about promoting green jobs through zoning allowances and incentives. I don't know if we know what a green job is. I also don't know if we want to put so much on our zoning, which is already very difficult to achieve. I think in our discussions about Canyon Park, we said we would reserve zoning allowances and incentives for affordable housing first and affordable commercial space second. And I'm afraid to put in something here which might not be achievable because we are putting so much on ourselves. I want the goals to really feel achievable.
We can bring back some language on green jobs. There's sort of on the industry side, there's examples of industries that promote energy resilience, energy conservation, but then there's like small businesses that offer services that are green or sustainable, that help promote sort of individuals to kind of have choices in like it could be salons that offer hair salons that offer all natural products, or like there's a lot of scales and different examples. So we could bring that back and you can see if that works for you to have sort of a different scale of definition. give more meaning to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. I think that would mesh really well with what Commissioner Westerbeck was saying about providing spaces for small businesses, which is something we've already discussed about incentivizing through the zoning code. I think we're getting to a combined idea that expresses both of those.
And it's probably a detail well below the policy level, but when I look at supporting adaptation of parks and trails to be resilient to extreme heat, the first thing I think about is water. And I look at the pop-up dog park, which is a big open area with minimal shade and no water. So, and again, that's kind of in the weeds, but it's a very important weed to think about. Bottle filling stations. Any other comments on economic development? Before we move on, I think we should do a time check. We're at 9 o'clock, which is our scheduled end of the meeting. We've gone through 8 policies in over an hour, and we've got, 6 more. I guess I'd look to staff. Is this something we should continue? Should we try to power through?
The meeting on July 5th is, I believe, exclusively focused on land use. So there's no public hearings that night. I will look at Kirsten to see if she would rather finish the rest of this on that night or power through tonight.
Yeah, it's just tricky because I have a feeling that our land use discussion is probably going to be rather lengthy. So it might be in our interest to try and finish this tonight, and also to keep the focus on land use as well, and kind of keep that clarity. But
Yeah, and then I think one thing too is, as we go through the next 3 comments, if there are additional questions, we could always take those via email after the meeting and then have the consultant respond and provide those in the next packet.
Okay, I just wanted to point out where we were. Commissioner Curd.
This is Carson Curd. I move to extend the meeting for half an hour. Up
All
to
right.
half an hour.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'm wondering too, based on Deputy Director Winchell's recommendation, perhaps maybe we could finish the presentation, and then if there's any major topics that people want to discuss, we can do that. And then any other sort of smaller questions that come up, you can email us and we'll get some responses back. Okay, let's do that.
Let's do that. But I think we are still at the conclusion of our scheduled time, so we do need to extend the meeting. So
We'll second the motion to extend for 30 minutes.
all right, it's been moved and seconded to extend the meeting till 9:30. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. I'm not sure those were enthusiastic ayes, but we're gonna go for it.
All right, so Lisa, let's go ahead and just go through the rest of the presentation. And then if, again, there's any kind of major comments or questions you want to make sure we discuss here in person, we'll get to those. So I will go on to the next slide.
That's good. I think for economic development, we have in some way, shape, or form covered the policies that are more detailed versions of the goals. So this might be an area where we could economize. If anybody wrote something down on their paper, we could take that or we can move on.
Yeah, and I can also share the presentation after this as well.
That'd be very useful. Thanks.
So emergency management, the city, as I mentioned earlier, is working on updating some of its emergency management plans over the same time period. So we've been coordinating with that staff, and we anticipate this might morph a bit as well. But we have a goal there to increase government capacity to provide effective emergency management, ensure it's culturally competent, and providing capital investments in critical facilities. So the couple of policies mentioned there are from the Commerce Menu of Measures to increase staff capacity related to climate change and environmental justice. And creating template evacuation plans and outreach materials to support residents, practice actions, providing it in multiple languages. Human health. We did get some early feedback from fire and police in terms of just issues that they've run into in providing service delivery. We expect that they'll weigh in on some of these goals and policies as well. One idea, creating or identifying resilience hubs for a central point of resources. When we get to the policies on the next slide, I'll go into that a little more. Reducing community exposure to extreme heat, expanding partnerships and education to protect community health against adverse air quality, investing in community and workforce resilience efforts, and reducing exposure to vectors. So that would be like mosquitoes and things like that. So example policies, identifying one or more resilience hubs for cooling and clean air and ensuring community accessibility via transit. So that could be a community center or the senior center, some kind of center where it could be a day use type of facility. It could be a place where you get sort of a one-stop shop on information. It could be a power, if there was a power outage, a place to recharge your phone and so on. So we can share more about that if there's interest. And then other activities here, program to distribute cooling units and install heat pumps, prioritizing low-income residents, employing outdoor work protocols during extreme heat or smoke events to reduce potential adverse health, and using integrated pest management to reduce exposure to vectors. So I mentioned earlier the Humidex information, and just wanted to mention there was a study done by the University of Washington that looked at King County information that said above 88 degrees Humidex, that heat and humidity, there was an increase in calls for basic life service. And then above 92 degrees, there's an increase in calls for advanced life safety service. So they've documented that in King County, and so that was the reason why the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group was showing the Humidex information. So we've discussed that a bit with the fire department so far. And then ecosystems, you'll see a lot of this is adapting language you already have in your natural environment element to add in resilience. And I think some of these get at some of the comments earlier about ensuring we address the environment more broadly. So here we have a general policy and one on fish and wildlife. You'll see one on wetlands. And that memo that's in your packet from the Watershed Company they're on our team along with other folks, and they're suggesting these changes to build resilience into the good policies you have around critical area protection, for example. More on wetlands. Native vegetation, and then geologically hazardous areas. And then we get into waste management. So this is the resilience side of waste management when we covered the mitigation side earlier. So this is managing debris during and after disasters and coordinating road, stormwater, and sewer improvements. So implementing a strategy to expedite debris management work. And then identifying opportunities for joint planning of road, stormwater, and sewer infrastructure in areas subject to extreme precipitation and flooding. And then water resources. This is a section that the Watershed Company also weighed in on with goals around implementing an integrated water resource management approach. That would be surface and groundwater, improving water quality and quantity, conserving reuse and retaining water supply, and creating a water resource climate action committee where ideas and goals that are represented in the more detailed policies. And then zoning and development is broader than buildings and energy, but it certainly overlaps it to some degree. But here we're looking at connectivity to destinations with green infrastructure. We'll look at policies on the next slide that give more meaning to that. Reducing single occupancy vehicles and reducing parking, providing multimodal options for daily activities, and adapting critical area and flood regulations for resilience and protecting and improving ecosystem benefits. So we obviously had some measures in the mitigation section that were at reducing vehicle miles traveled. Here we're doing it from the angle of providing redundancy in the way you move around a community, connectivity for sort of evacuation and recovery type activities. So I think the next slide has some example policies. So this goes to the green infrastructure side of things that was mentioned in the goal, adding parks, open spaces, and non-motorized trails to connect the various destinations across Bothell, limiting parking near transit to encourage use of transit and decrease single occupancy vehicle, ensuring public transit stops are located near shopping centers, and protecting and enhancing natural resources that provide multiple benefits. Again, this is a crossover with some of the conservation on the mitigation element side. There you go. We got through that in lightning speed.
Okay. Definitely picked up the pace. So again, I'd encourage commissioners to submit comments, and I've got a few notes myself, to staff on this. And it'll be coming back to us again sometime later, like much later. Or?
Yeah, right now we have a bit of a packed schedule between Planning Commission and Council.
Sure.
Our next goal is to bring probably a draft integrating some of these comments and additional comments and feedback we hear from the public over the summertime into a session with Council, and then probably come back to you folks after we get a chance to talk to Council. So that'll be a big part of the ongoing engagement through the summer, both with our working group as well as some of the events in the summer, particularly Sustainamania. That'll be a big time for us to elicit feedback from the public on this part of the plan.
So again, make your comments and we'll see that those are incorporated when it comes back to us. Any other feedback anyone wants to provide at this point? Seeing none. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
We do have one more slide, I think.
Oh, okay.
We did just want to give a really quick update on engagement activities, so you guys know what we've done since you last talked to us. Some more specific dates on some of the summer events that are coming out and additional outreach. And we have Sarah Frost, our community engagement specialist, waiting patiently in the side to talk briefly to you.
And hi all, sorry I'm in a weird dark room. Yeah, so a lot of this has already been discussed, but just further Engage Bothell portal updates have been happening. We have an activity on there right now if you'd like to go participate. I'll be doing more marketing on that tomorrow to really push it out to everyone else, but we are looking for feedback there, so check that out. Summer events, we're going to be participating in 3 of the summer nights events that are happening on Friday nights hosted by our Parks Department. We'll be at 2 of the cultural nights and 1 of the art nights, and then also Sustainamania, as Kirsten mentioned. And then, as Lisa mentioned, we are doing the additional outreach with the focus groups. We have another meeting scheduled for July with them, I believe, and we're really trying to get that targeted feedback from that group while getting the broader community feedback from some of the other summer events.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson. I'm so excited to see these, and I think Commissioner Jones' question, what makes Bothell special, I think she really deserves credit for bringing that up, and to you
Absolutely.
for you for making it there. What is the website?
Yeah, so it's engagebothell.com.
Engage.bothell, or just all one word?
Engagebothell.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. And it'll be linked, as of tomorrow, it'll be linked on our city website. It'll be on the city's Facebook page, Instagram, all of that as well. But you all are sort of getting the first sneak peek.
Thank you for that privilege.
So that does conclude our presentation. So thank you all for being here with us tonight, and thank you to Lisa and Adam for attending. It's really exciting to start getting you guys to get to meet our consulting team that are really fantastic. We'll have a bunch more of them in person at the July 5th event, so that'll be great.
Well, and thank you all for that. Very interesting. We're very engaged and look forward to continuing to participate. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Does that conclude this study session?
Yes.
All right. Next item is reports from staff. Anything to bring to us?
Nothing major tonight. Just reminding you all that we have a meeting on July 5th and July 19th, and then it'll be the Planning Commission break over August, and then we'll be back in September.
Most of us.
Yes, I won't see you all for a while.
All right. Reports from members. Seeing none, perhaps due to the hour. I don't believe we have anything additional to report to council. Therefore, being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner
I move
Westerbeck.
to adjourn Planning Commission tonight.
Second?
I second.
Been moved and seconded. We adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous. The commission is adjourned at 9:15 tonight. Our next meeting will be July 5th. Thank you all for your participation.